to just have this conversation with an Italian and him telling him, no, I think it's going to be the immigrants who are going to reach the Italians. To me, that was like eye-opening.
Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, Where God is at Work, a podcast that sits at the intersection of missions theory and practice. We're walking at our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Pauly, a missions leader serving in Rome, and I'm here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, church planter in Cisterna di Latina, and Jenn Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are jumping back into our Leaders of Forecast that we talked about in our last episode by Jay Matenga, who I hope I'm saying his name correctly every time. And this is out of the World Evangelical Alliance. We talked a little bit intro this document last episode, but we know that in this, which by the way, last episode I talked about 12 points. There are actually 11 points in the article. But nonetheless, we'll link everything below and we'll be able to, you'll be able to reference it yourselves at home. But we wanted to dedicate this second episode to it just to go a little bit deeper into some of the other points that we might have neglected or just didn't have time for in the first episode. And right before we hit record, I thought, man, we're having such a good conversation. We need to hit record and then continue this conversation. So I think we should just jump back into what we were talking about as we were talking before. And the third point that he kind of makes in the article is regarding, he entitled it "The Need of Environments." And so, yeah, let's just jump in right there. I don't know, Jenn, do you want to kind of maybe give a little summary of that point, and then we can continue what we were saying?
Yeah, I mean, he highlights what is becoming more and more evident to all of us, which is that he says the World Economic Forum predicts that half of the global risks we will face in the next 10 years will be environmental. So much of what's happening in the world, whether it's from erosion or major storms or drought or all of these things, they're impacting sometimes the poorest and the most desperate places already. So inequitably, those things are being hit. And there's this sense that we maybe have been too utilitarian with our environment, with the world. We haven't necessarily been the stewards that we need to be. And that this is having an impact on mission, one, because it's affecting human lives, two, because it's affecting, our witness and all that we have to say about what's right, holy, and good, and how God created us to be stewards of the earth. But then Alessandro also pointed out, and I'd love for him to say more about this, that it also affects our own character. We're compromising our character when we're not caring for the earth as God commanded us to do. So this has been eye-opening for me as I moved to France. I would say, I was from the Northwest United States, which is a part of the country that is very concerned about the environment. Recycling is done on a normal basis. There were things that were part of my habits, but the value system within the church was significantly different when I came to France, that they understood the need to not use paper plates and plastic cups at a potluck, but really just use real plates and forks and wash them as part of their caretaking of the environment. They really recognize that as part of their identity as Christians. And that's something that I didn't feel like I had in the US. I didn't link caring for creation as part of my identity as a Christian. And so I think Jamie Mtenga is underlining this in part of what we need to be concerned about going forward.
Yeah, I think when it comes to discussing environmental just thought ideas, specifically in the Christian world, it's often undermined, it's often not talked about. I still remember in seminary, in my mission class, my professor brought it up. He was like, now we're going to talk about something that everybody always neglects, which is the pillaging, the destroying of the environment. And then somebody brought up something else. I can't remember exactly how it went. Somebody brought up another topic, and he got drawn into that topic. He was like, okay, let's not talk about this. Let's just go to that one. That one's more interesting. And I was like, you literally just did what you said people are doing, but he didn't catch it. Like, he literally went to the other topic because we didn't have enough time in the class. And I just was like, wow, like he doesn't even realize what he just did.
Oh, man.
But yeah, going back to the whole character idea, I just imagine, which is something I've actually seen, the analogy of my son, for example. Let's say something doesn't work, like a remote control doesn't work anymore, and so you say, here, you can play with it, and so they can play with it because now it has no more value, or as far as something being that works. But if he starts like smashing it and breaking it, and you could just see there's something wrong with him, you'd be like, whoa, okay, it's not working. You could play with it, you could be rough with it, but you're going beyond. And sometimes we don't realize that the way we treat things is an effect in our character. Sure, you might have a different view, and we might all see differently on what the God's future plans is for the environment, but at the end of the day, it does affect your character, how you treat something, even if you might have a different view, like, oh, all of this is going to be gone away in the future. This is all going to be burnt away. But at the same time, but how you treat it now still affects your character now. And so it's very important to realize that how we treat, the Bible talks about the least of these. It was talking about the actual people, but it even goes beyond that. How you treat God's creation has an effect in how you behave, and you understand God's overall desire to love all things. And so something worth thinking about.
Like the article said, it is affecting the least of these in terms of those who have the least resources and the least capacity to recover from disasters. So it is even affecting on a human basis. But I agree with you, Alessandro. I was recently reading the Ten Commandments. When the Lord institutes the Sabbath, it's not just for humans. The animals are given rest as well. When God saves Nineveh, it's not just the humans. It says, and all of the animals were saved. So God has this concern for his creation, this love for his creation that he has. When we see in Adam and Eve, he gave it to them to steward and to care for. And like your son with the remote control, I think of how many times I have people apartment sit or take care of my dog or whatever. It's not theirs, but how would I feel if they just neglected the care of my dog or didn't, take care of my things? It would be such an affront to me as the owner. And I feel like that's what we do to God when we don't care for his creation.
Yeah, there's something to be said. We often talk about us as humans being, imago Dei, made in the image of God. But we don't give the same value to his other creation. And I think, and I sometimes I wonder how much of that has to do with that, with just a political influence, or this idea of we saw that a lot in 2020 when there was an uprising against racism and the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and people are just saying we should be talking about the gospel. We should be talking about the gospel. And I think that happens often, even with this kind of topic, stewardship of ecological resources and what's happening, in our world. And we just say, but we should just be focused on the gospel.
Well, years ago, Rich Stearns wrote that book, The Hole in Our Gospel, Hole. I don't know if you guys have read it. Mm-hmm. Our pastor had our whole church read it, and Rich Stearns came and talked, and it was this idea that we present, we can present the gospel of salvation and the spiritual side of what God does in saving our souls, and totally neglect all of the physical aspects of the real needs that people have of hunger. He was really focused on hunger and poverty, but I would throw the environment in there. And the whole gospel, WHOLE, is about the renewing of all things, of all of creation. And so when we truncate the gospel to, say this prayer and when you die, you'll go to heaven, we leave out this whole wealth of what Christ does for us and in us today and through us to bring blessing to the earth and to the peoples of the earth, and to announce this future and coming kingdom that the church is to be a signpost for. And so I really appreciated sort of that call to action. And that was 20 years ago. But that call to action, that our gospel has a hole in it. It's leaking. We're not sharing the plenitude and all of the wealth of what it means that Christ is King.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question, maybe Alessandro, because this is a missions podcast, guys. We're supposed to be talking about, taking the gospel to the unreached people of this world. Like, can't the other green people and the Greta Thunbergs of this world worry about that? Like, there's not very many of us missionaries out there to preach the gospel. So why, like, I'm in a little tongue in cheek, but what's the point of, why do we also need to include this in what we're saying?
Yeah, I'll answer that by going to like a different direction, where I think some of the reasons that a lot of us, and I'm including myself in it, that we neglect this topic and not focus in it. I think if we press on and have this conversation, a lot of Christians would say, yeah, I do agree that it is important. I think it's priorities. We prioritize other things versus this. So, for example, I understand that it's not good to buy plastic plates and all that stuff, or styrofoam plates in the US. I don't think I've ever found styrofoam plates here in Italy, in Europe. And so you're like, well, that's all we could afford, but not necessarily. You just need to prioritize and shift your budget and think more how the Lord can provide. And sometimes that's what we think. I remember reading a book, The Measure of a Man by Gene Getz. And he tells a story how he just moved in the town. I think it's Arizona, the state. I don't remember the city, but the previous owner was also a pastor, and he neglected his garden and all that stuff. And so he had a really bad witness there. And so when he moved in here, him and his wife made sure to like take care of the garden, really build it up. And that actually opened up doors. Not realizing that people are looking at us, as you said, Jenn, as testimonies in all areas. So if we neglect those things, then we don't realize we're actually hurting our witness, which then brings us back to that question. Like, that's why we need to get involved, because our witness is so important. And where we have lost credibility, we need to regain it. And one of those areas is through how we handle, how we steward things, all things. People notice how we steward our money, how we steward our children, how we steward then our material things, and of course also the environment.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think the term stewardship, we often, at least for me and many that I've talked to, think of money right away, but it goes much beyond. In fact, with our kids, that's kind of a theme right now, has been stewardship, because they definitely have been spoiled when it comes to some of their toys and things that they've gotten. And so, I've been using that word stewardship a lot. And my little, almost 5-year-old now is repeating it. So cute. She's like telling her little brothers to, that's not good stewardship when you throw the toys around and stuff. But it is like taking, I think, thinking of how it works into us and our own character, like you were saying earlier, but then also, what does that say to the people around us that are watching, that are observing? How do we live? And
I remember watching a friend of mine once wash the dishes. Now, for me, that's a task that I just want to get over as quick as possible. But so I'm just like, hurry up, get it done, whatever. But it was like she was almost caressing her pots and pans and just really taking care of them. And honestly, it struck me. I think I was convicted that I just take for granted so much of what's been given to me, and have started to try to work in some of those disciplines. Like rather than just folding the laundry to get it done as quickly as I can, I will think as I'm folding the shirt, I'm really thankful for these clothes, and I'm thankful for a washing machine to wash them. And I try to help raise my own awareness, hoping that that will also stretch me in other places. Just to be, I think it just starts with that attentiveness and that awareness that I don't know. I grew up where everything was disposable, and sometimes the paper plates, it wasn't even about the money, it was about the convenience and the ease. And we can get so focused on efficiency, or even, one of the other points he makes in this is the utility of all things, that we forget that there could be a blessed time when you're washing dishes in the kitchen after a potluck with other members of the church. That can also be an enriching time, instead of looking at everything as a time saver or how do I get this done as quickly as possible. So that's one of the things for me. It's the convenience factor that I rub up against. I think, how can I be the quickest or the most efficient, versus how can I take care of this thing in a way that expresses my gratitude.
Yeah. Before we kind of shift into like another topic, because I think it would be great to even explore the idea of the power of the majority on the move, I think is how he entitles it. But one of the things I was thinking too is like, there's been this idea that we have to divide, like our faith is for Sundays. You see this across many different religions. They have certain days that are for their, and then they just live their life however they want all the other days. But the reality is, as Bible-believing Christians, we should be seeking to live out our faith in all that we're doing, which plays out. And that's something that's a bit unique. So yeah, I would encourage us all, wherever we're at, to be thinking that way. But I thought it would be good, kind of as a second section to dive into, is this idea that he brings up in point 9, which is the power of the majority on the move. And we've been talking about this for quite some time, but the reality is the global South, when we say that, we're talking about south of the equator, right, is now, if I remember correctly, 69% Christian. And that's influencing a lot of our Christian culture and faith throughout the rest of the world. I was recently talking with Alessandro. We've been, we're both serving in Italy, and that's obviously a people group that we've recognized we want to share the gospel with, et cetera, et cetera. But it was interesting, Alessandro, maybe you can share more of this, but just the conversation that you brought up with one of your interns, who's an Italian. He was just talking about how he believed that it's going to be the immigrants, the refugees, the people that have moved to Italy that will have a greater impact on Italians for the kingdom, right?
Yeah. So we one of the things that we've noticed, and when I say we, I mean like all the the Italian churches, the missionaries that have planted, just the continuous difficulty on reaching Italians, and just wrestling with that idea. And in my case, having a unique setup where we started reaching immigrants, and having this train of thought that, okay, we can't just reach so many immigrants, because we also want to reach Italians. And there might be that this understanding that at times when you're reaching immigrants, for the most part, usually if we're talking about immigrants who are coming for work purposes, who are coming to leave their country for war reasons and other reasons, they usually are on the more needy basis, where so then you are kind of overdoing your resources physically and financially. So there's this idea that if you make a church that's predominantly immigrants, then you're not going to be able to reach the people group that you were intending to. So if you switch it up and reach more Italians, then you would have, in this case, because we're here, then we would have more resources to reach the immigrants. Logically, it makes sense, but we've been seeing that spiritually it's just been so hard to reach Italians. And to just have this conversation with an Italian and him telling him, no, I think it's going to be the immigrants who are going to reach the Italians. To me, that was like eye-opening. Like, oh, I've been thinking it all wrong. Like, I'm thinking like, okay, great God, we love the fact that you're bringing so many immigrants here, but we also want to reach Italian. And he's sort of telling, no, I think that's the right steps that we're taking. And to me, that was such a blessing to hear from him. And it wasn't just him, his wife. And he said other people have voiced that, a voice that I haven't heard before. Maybe I was just talking to the wrong people.
I've heard people from England and France say somewhat the same thing, Alessandro. And the big challenge is actually getting the national church to work with the immigrant churches, because it tends to be a great divide, which is the real tragedy. And what I love about what Jamie is saying is actually many of these people that are migrants are already Christians. God is mobilizing them through their work. And yes, they have this trauma of being displaced. And yes, the physical needs are huge. They're significant. But they are carrying the gospel with them on the move into these places, like you said, that are traditionally extremely hard to reach. So I don't wonder if, as what you're doing, one of our biggest calls is to figure out how do we get those two to cooperate a little bit more. Yeah.
We're attending right now an international church, and the pastor of the church recently wrote his thesis on this idea of international churches planting churches alongside national churches, with exactly this idea, like how can, and we've talked about it before, how can those of us who are immigrants in a place be a part of playing that role as the necessary outsider that can move, can act in ways that aren't expected by the national culture and the norm of an area, so that the gospel might go forth and we can kind of shake things up a little bit. And I think part of it is that our brothers and sisters coming from the global south into Europe, into the Americas and so forth, making sure that they see that too, that they see that God has given them a unique opportunity to, whether they're moving as refugees or rather they're moving as entrepreneurs or whatever the reason that God's moving them, that's not as important. It's more important that they see themselves on mission wherever they're going, and that hopefully with humility, with this a mindset of doing missions with those that are already there, they might be part of that catalyst for seeing the gospel go forth in a certain place. I think, I don't know if this is oversimplifying it, so please jump in, guys, and correct me, but I think we see that in miniature when we look at like events. There's always, those stories of people who come to faith because they went to the Christian camp. And what happens is you're outside of your regular context. There's an outside voice that comes to speak usually at that context. And so that is kind of an opportunity where you're vulnerable, you're kind of out there, and you also feel this sort of trust that you can just share, freely. And so I wonder if that's not what we're experiencing on a larger scale when we see different people moving around the world and having those unique opportunities.
Yeah, you just explained exactly what I call the necessary stranger. That's your kid who's gone to church with you every single Sunday of his whole life and heard you pray every night, goes away to camp and hears the gospel for the first time, in quotes. I mean, and so you can do nothing but rejoice. But what made that that space a welcome place, that necessary stranger? It's the same thing that happens, the classic, people pouring out their troubles to the bartender who doesn't know them from Adam, but all of a sudden the bartender's hearing all of their deepest secrets. Or, the passenger next to you on a plane telling you things that she hasn't told her husband. And like, why are you telling me this? So there are those spaces that open up with strangers. And I think that's something we can help people identify and lean into. And also, I think we have to think about what it means to welcome the stranger as they're coming into the places where we live and work, because we know that there are political structures that create all sorts of hindrances. I too am in an international church, and there are several that are people that are waiting for visas that have fled because of real persecution, that have faced real trauma, and that have these genuine needs. And it's again a both and, going back to that holistic gospel. Yes, let's mobilize them, let's empower them as witnesses, let's encourage them as they bring their faith to say, oh, we're so glad you're here to be part of our faith family and to be part of our witness in the world. And let's be the church for them and recognize that they might need some healing, they might need some recovery, they might need some resources. And isn't that beautiful that we all have something to offer, and we all have needs. And I think sometimes we can tend to rank in the church like the people who have it all together, they're the ones who have something to give, and the people who have struggles, they're the ones who have something to get. And the truth is, I mean, the prophets say it over and over that we've got to look, that the poor have something to give. They have something to teach us. They have something we need that we don't understand. And so this opportunity of migrants on the move and being mobilized, I think, can really open up the church to experience that in a more regular way.
Yeah, it's definitely that idea of mutuality is so key even in this sector of thinking. So kind of inevitably all of this causes us to wonder, like, what is the future of missions? You know, like we've talked about it plenty of times. We probably will talk about it a little bit more, but you know, there's been a shift in technology, and how do we use technology now? I mean, we've seen in the last 15 to 20 years just how quickly technology has advanced and how much that has impacted our everyday life. But then also we're seeing this change of the global South becoming the majority in Christianity. And so what kind of impacts does that have on how we lead? How do we work together for future? And I would argue we're even seeing just a shift in how how we used to talk about unreached people groups, and we used to think about those unreached people groups in the 1040 window or something to that court. But with the increasing mobility of people around the world, that's changing even quite a bit. You know, in here in Rome, there's a refugee center or a ministry that ministers to refugees and other migrants. They've had over 100 different countries come through in just the 7 or 8 years, I think, that they've been around. Well, maybe it's 10 years. But just to say, like, there's been a lot of key changes happening. You know, let's talk a little bit about what the future of missions looks like, drawing from our own experiences, but also from this article that we read. And I can say, like, for myself, some of the stuff he said resonated. I didn't have the words probably to put them in a place, but I was able to identify myself in them. One of the things that came out, we were part of, for our organization, reestablishing a presence in this country. And so when we got here, we kind of jumped on board with some previous connections that the missionaries that had been here before us had. And after, I would say, a somewhat difficult first 5 years, we started recognizing that there's just this huge miscommunication that happened. And after a conversation with one of the pastors that we were working with, it came out like they were expecting, you know, missionaries that were coming, that were experts, that were going to take charge and lead everything. And you know, and we were all people coming with relatively low ministry experience. I mean, we had maybe volunteered at the church or done an internship or something, but not really any of us had pastored a church. and none of us at the time had gone through a seminary or anything. We'd only done maybe Bible college at best. But we were willing to submit, to help, and to encourage. But they weren't thinking that that's what they were receiving. They thought they were receiving someone that was going to take the lead. And so already I would argue that as the global, or sorry, not the global, but as the mission force is changing too, we're getting younger and younger people coming to experience mission. We're not coming as often with that idea of, hey, I'm going to come and pastor, I'm going to come and lead. It's more of, hey, I'm going to come and hold up your arms while you are leading the people. And so I felt affirmation, I guess, from what I was reading, because I actually identify quite a lot with that. In fact, we're in this phase where we're thinking of church planting. And I used to think, oh, that means I have to be the church planter. But no, I want to be part of that core team that's supporting the person who will be the church planter. How do you see missions changing in this up and coming world?
Well, we've already discussed this in another episode of ours, but I think the fact that we have access to go back home is huge, and obviously it has changed so much since when people were never coming back home. As you said, I think you said people used to say pack your coffin with you, and then having the accessibility of actually maybe going home via plane. But it's getting even more accessible, where it's I know missionaries who go home at least 3-4 times a year, not necessarily to go see family because they're homesick, but because of different responsibilities they have. But it just kind of shows you that there's a difference between what it looks like to go and pack everything and establish it and making it this your home. And I wonder if that's something that mission agencies have to kind of emphasize. How do you then identify that place that you are staying now as your home? Because I think that's huge. I think you need to. Both Allison and I, we felt like where we are at was home right away. In fact, in one of her testimonies that she had shared is that she thanks God that she feels like this is home, because it's good to set roots and to know where you God is sending you. Sure, you can go back home and visit. You could be homesick. That's great. But to always thinking about my real home is back where I came from, I think that's not healthy. And so, yes, okay, we might be able to have more access to go back and forth, but I think to then have that additional training to say, okay, but how do you make sure you establish roots where you are now called to be, at least for the timeline that God has called you to be there?
I know that helps build trust too with our partners here. It helps them to just feel like we can be dependent on, and that we're not just going to pull the escape hatch as soon as things get rocky or rough. Yeah, and my experience is very similar to yours, Jesse. When we came, we were commissioned as church planters by our mission organization, and very early on realized that we wanted to support French church planters. We wanted to be on their team. We wanted to come alongside and figure out how our efforts could contribute to the vision that they had. And but what that's created with this missions everywhere, from everywhere to everywhere paradigm, is a need to think through what it means to be a receiving country. Because now, not every country is just either a sender or a receiver, but most countries are both. And we're used to preparing people to go, but we're not so used to preparing people to receive. And that's where you have these misunderstandings, Jesse, like the Italian church thinking a missionary meant they're going to come and lead everything. So how do we help create receiving, not just sending centers, but receiving centers that create healthy expectations, healthy pathways for outsiders to join in healthy ways, for outsiders to have that space to be the necessary stranger, but not have to be a superhero or even an expert, to be companions along the route, to be people whose perspective can help shape, and I would say even protect, the church, because each church can get so enculturated that we become blind to certain sins or inoculated against some bad thinking. And as outsiders, we can bring in a perspective that says, well, wait a minute. Just like, as we were talking about the environment, the French church helped open my eyes to what I feel like was a blind spot. In the American church, there are things that go the other way. Things that, the French church needs to realize that, one example is all the evangelical churches here were just ugly. Thought they were having an ugly contest. Like it was, how cheap can we make this? And it was this major pushback against the wealth of the Catholic Church and the extravagances, but to the point where they weren't reflecting God's beauty at all. And we're in France, who loves beauty. And so as an outsider, I would say, wait a minute, there's a major disconnect here. we see how you got here, but we're not sure why you're staying here. So we all need, this sender and receiver dynamic is going through a major shift, and we're going to have to figure out how to accommodate and even benefit from the shift that God is bringing about.
Oh, that's great. That's a good point. And I really hope, that those of you who are listening are forwarding these resources on to your sending agencies, to the churches that have sent you, because it really is important that I think, whether you're a church in the middle of the United States somewhere, or whether you're, coming from Africa to Europe or wherever you might be going or coming from, that the whole church, the capital C church, starts to wrestle with some of these ideas, because otherwise we're going to get to wherever God's taking us and be disillusioned with what is reality when you arrive and when you start mixing and working with people from all over the world. And it just takes that much more of a learning curve than to adapt. But if we can get ahead of it, I know I've talked to some people that are mobilizers back in the US, and they're encouraging people to listen to our podcast. I would encourage them not just to listen to our podcast, but also look up the resources, read them for themselves. And because I can't help but think as a missions leader, how much I would love if future missionaries that are in the pipeline to come and serve around the world were already thinking about these things. We're already chewing on these things. Well, thank you for listening and tuning in to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you found it insightful. Your ministry is important, and we really do hope that you consider your time with us as investment in your work. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your friends. Until next time, keep going wherever Jesus leads.